Welcome to our latest webcast on this fascinating but somewhat distressing topic of failure demand and the impact on customer and colleague experience. Thanks for joining us. I know we've got people from all around the world. For some of you, it's very early in the morning, and some of you, it's very late. So thanks for taking the time to be with us. It's a great pleasure to be delivering this from London and Zurich. Very pleased to have with me Isabella Koch, who's a strategic consultant in service experience and employee experience, customer experience, and former head of GBS service management at Swarovski. And Isabella, I think you also started your career in a kind of consumer-facing role. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Yes. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for the invitation. Really pleased to be here with you today. And yes, it's true. I started in a completely different world. I started in the TV world in Switzerland, where actually digitalized the Swiss TV landscape. And it was very consumer facing, very, very difficult because we had to move people from analog TV to digital TV. So we had to create the best experiences whatsoever and the best services around them.
That's great, and that's a great context for this conversation. And I'm Dan French. I'm the one on the left, if you couldn't tell. Thanks for joining us, and thanks, Isabella. Looking forward to this conversation. So we've got 30 minutes together. I want to be conscious of everybody's time. So we've kind of introduced who we are. I want to talk a little bit about failure demand and bounce that around with Isabella. And let's talk a little bit about some of the lessons in customer experience failures. And clearly, we need to work out what's the answer. And there's going to be an opportunity for some Q&A. So as we go through this, if you've got a question, when it hits your mind, just use the Q&A panel on the GoToWebinar interface and pop the question in. And then at the end of the session, we'll pick them out and we'll answer whatever we can in the time. For those we don't have time for, we will respond by email. So whatever happens, you'll get responded to. So ask any questions as they dawn on you. So some of you will have realized or noticed that the invitation to this discussion was called the Gordian knot of service delivery. And a couple of people asked me, what is a Gordian knot? And it's interesting that we often talk about, certainly in English, a knotty problem, as in something that's all tied up. But in this particular case, it shows that myths and legends do have a purpose, because you can read this for yourself. But it's kind of interesting that this term comes from either a physical event or or sort of memories of a physical event, and the only way of solving this problem, maybe it's a mythical problem, was actually to take a very sharp sword and chop the thing in half. And so you can see why that has become a term. So that's a little bit of added interest. But this thing, failure demand, we've all experienced it. We may not have had a name for it. And this idea of having, this demand on resources, on services, which are only there because we failed to do something right for the customer. And we've all, and you can read this yourself, but we've all experienced this in the consumer world, and in many areas they call this, the failure demands the cause of customer churn. Customers saying, I don't want to deal with this anymore. Whether it's your broadband provider, your cable TV or whatever. So it's kind of it's a challenging problem. And as I say, we all see it, but what's really behind it? And this you might think is a little bit Orwellian. So ultimately, if you have a lot of failure demand, you end up with a service center that looks like this. Excuse me. It's the size of a football stadium, and thousands of people trying to respond in a pretty ineffective way to requests. So here's some classic cases about how failure demand occurs. Isabella, what's your, again, you can read this, but what's your view about the most sort of pernicious examples of failure demand in your experience from this loss?
Yeah. When I looked at this list, I'd say what resonates most, probably with all of us, is when processes that should simplify actually turn into labyrinth. And also when tickets are marked as closed, but the customer still feels unresolved. I think those are the moments where failure demand really explodes because people come back again and again for the very same issue.
Yeah, yeah. And we know as consumers sometimes if you're calling in for something to do with your own, your cell phone service or your TV service or your broadband service, sometimes you come across where you get some kind of support ticket opened. The service desk feels they've done what they can, and you're none the wiser, and you haven't been helped, and that's kind of really, really frustrating as a customer, and as a colleague, it's very frustrating as well. And it's kind of interesting that sometimes these requests for support actually create more activity and more heat than actual illumination. So I think it's fair to say if you haven't been there as a consumer, you're very, very lucky. I think not a week goes by without me having been in failure demand as a consumer. And we've all been there as our own companies. We know that's true. And the bigger the company, typically the more of it you have. And probably we're all responsible for creating some of it unwittingly. But the time has come for us to work out what's the cause of it and how do we stop it happening. So, Isabella, why does this happen?
So there's the single most expensive phrase in any organization, and this phrase is, "This is not my department." Every time we push something away, costs multiply. So in time, frustration, trust. And that's the nature of a compound cost. Small deflections may seem still harmless, but when they accumulate across teams and processes, they grow into a massive invisible tax on the entire organization. And that's the essence.
I'm sorry, carry on.
No, I just said, so this is the essence, right? This is not my department. I think this summarizes exactly where the problem lies.
And I guess you can also realize that the people who feel it's not my department, they're also suffering a problem in that they're being expected to provide a broad range of service and knowledge and expertise to the consumer or the colleague or the customer. But actually they may not have the ability to do it. They may not have the knowledge, the systems, the access to the information, which everyone has a problem in this.
Yeah, that's true.
So give us some thoughts about this whole issue of handoffs.
Yeah, so what usually follows the "not my department" phrase is the handoff. So a simple request then usually falls into sort of a black hole, and every redirect teaches the people to stop trusting the system. And trust doesn't explode at once. It leaks and leaks away, one failed interaction at a time. And one day in the future, the account is empty and you end up in trust bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the discussion about trust is really fascinating. There's a great book, The Trusted Advisor. If you haven't read it, it's worth a read. In every discipline we all operate in, this is a useful, thought-provoking book. And this guy, Charles Green, he created a trust equation, which I think is really smart because it really focuses on the issues. And what he argues is that trust or trustworthiness is the sum of credibility, do you know what you're doing, plus reliability, that you say what you do and do what you say and you do it repeatedly, so you're delivering on expectations, plus the rapport or intimacy, but it's all divided by the apparent self-interest. Now, if you think about this failure demand issue, the big things here is that there may be a credibility gap as well, but reliability, you generally find when failure demand occurs, that what is being offered or what you're being told to expect is not what you get. So reliability is very low. And the other side of it is there is a perceived self-interest, because when it's not my department is the answer or the implied answer, that really reflects on the other individual saying, look, I can't help you. This is, it's my problem, not your problem. So I think that's a really helpful way of thinking about it, and also looking at some of the root causes. So you know, I definitely encourage you to have a look at the Trusted Advisor, because there's other good stuff in there as well. So, Isabella, talk to us a little bit about this experience debt.
Yeah. So we've just seen in this nice equation how trust can break down, but I think the real danger is in what happens next, because every unresolved issue piles up like unpaid bills, I always say. So that's what I call experience debt. Experience debt works like credit card debt. At first, you don't notice it so much, but within time, it becomes very, very expensive. So it's also important to notice that silence is not necessarily success. It can just mean that people stopped expecting anything better from you. So if you think we no longer get requests, we no longer get escalations, everything is fine, that can actually mean that people stopped, bothering about you.
It's interesting, and it raises some big questions about measurement as well, metrics, because we tend to generally believe that if complaints and escalations go down, we're doing better, but that might not actually be true.
Yes, we will see later.
Yeah, and then there's this frustration cycle that you've articulated here, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, so the experience steps that I just explained has consequences. It's the best way to turn yourself in the organization from a trusted partner into an obstacle. And it always follows the same pattern, as you can see here. It starts with confusion. So people say, why is this so complicated? Why can't I just get what I need to get? Then you go into frustration. I've explained this 3 times already and nothing changes. Then you go into avoidance. I know a guy who knows a guy who could potentially solve this for me. So people start to bypass. And then finally, you go into what I always call the silent rebellion, an intentional, complete system bypass. So people really intentionally start to bypass your system because they are so frustrated with it. And the warning sign is usually, it's even simple. When escalations drop, it can mean that you've already lost the relationship. People start to bypass, and that's the death of any partnership.
Yeah, that's a great point. And you can see so many situations where, certainly in the internal organization, people get frustrated with extended delays in tickets or issues that get raised and get kicked around to different people. It can go on so long that any priority you originally had gets lost. It affects everyone down the chain. It's a very it's like a virus, basically.
Yeah, and I think we all know the situation when finally we just pick up the phone and call somebody because we just can't get what we need to get, right? Then we say,
Yeah.
you know this process, can you not help me? And this is the start of this cycle.
And of course, we talked about metrics. They don't always tell the truth, do they?
Yeah, this is where we fool ourselves usually. We just measure the wrong things. We measure tickets closed, we measure response time, we measure department KPIs. And all of this looks good on paper, while the experience still fails in reality. So we should measure employee effort required, trust maintained, value created, because otherwise silos hit their targets while the end-to-end journey still fails. I like to say numbers win, but people lose in the end.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because tickets closed and response time, these kind of measures are really primarily useful for resource planning for the service provider, but not very useful for the customer of the service.
Yeah, they're useful, but they're not. They don't show the full. They don't give the full picture.
So this whole issue of failure demand, and it's good it's got a name. Now it's got a name, we can do something about it. But it comes at the same time that we are getting a lot of focus within GBS and within business in general about a focus on customer experience, colleague experience, employee experience. And there's a massive focus now on how do we improve the experience. Now, obviously, it's a nuanced discussion because experience has to come with an acceptable cost. But we have this focus, but the failure demand challenge is not always getting the attention it deserves. So the key question is, how do we fix it? How do we fix failure demand? Is it about people? Is it about process? Is it about data? Is it about technology? Or is it about something else? And Isabella and I discussed this, and the first thing that comes to my mind is, if you always start with why, it does help kind of zoom out from the specific problem. Why are we delivering this service? Why is the customer or colleague or consumer using this service? And that really takes you out to some pretty fundamental questions. And start with why is a very good mindset to get into in all organizations. So from that perspective, Isabella, talk to us about how you think we crack this.
Yes, how do we crack it? So what's the alternative to what we do at the moment? I think we should move from silo owners to experience owners. Give someone in the company the authority across boundaries and measure them on outcomes. Because silo leaders protect their territory and experience owners protect the journey. And that's how problems get solved instead of passed along. Process owners protect their turf, experience owners protect the outcome. You can also say process owners celebrate efficiency and experience owners celebrate effectiveness.
It's interesting, this end-to-end cycle is the key thing. Once you start zooming out from beyond the specific service and you see the entire cycle that the customer has to go through, it gives you an entirely new perspective. So, but it's a great point about when you have a very narrow focus, that tends to be your territory. It's a very interesting perspective. So this is a mindset issue, really. So how do you fix that mindset?
Yeah, I think we need a course correction there. I mean, it's our choice, right? We can stay the ticket factory, the necessary evil in the company, the cost center always, or we can become the productivity enabler, the trust builder, the value creator. And the choice is basically ours. So we should always ask ourselves, are we just managing services or are we really enabling success? For everything we do, we should ask this question.
It's a great point, and it also raises other questions for senior leadership when providing metrics and targets for organization units, functions, departments. You want to be clear that you're not just not focusing people on a budgetary outcome, because a budgetary outcome will focus you on failure demand. What is the real value outcome of what we're trying to deliver, I think, is a powerful part of that. But that course correction, that fixing the mindset is a great observation. So what's the recipe?
The recipe is actually rather simple. I think, first of all, diagnose reality, not only process maps, reality. Then design for end-to-end experience, not just for efficiency, really for end-to-end experience. And then finally, deliver trust, not just service, deliver trust. Because trust, in my opinion, is the real metric. It's not complicated, to be honest, but it takes courage. And you don't need permission to start. Everybody could start today.
That's a great point. That's, if you look at those 3 points, I almost see that as number one about curiosity. How do you understand what's going on? And number two is that outside in view, zooming out, that design for the end-to-end experience. And 3 is the courage, as you say, to deliver trust and make a change. So just a reminder for everyone, I'm sure you've got some questions, because if you haven't, there's something missing here, because there's some big questions I've got. Be sure to pop the questions on the GoToWebinar interface and we'll get to the ones we can or respond to the others by email. So Isabella talked very compellingly about this end-to-end focus, the experience focus and trust. And when you come back to, we think about some of the classic problems we see, this idea of watermelon KPIs. I'm sure you all heard of this. The KPIs, I've had GBS leaders say to me, why is it that whenever we have a readout at the senior leadership, all of our KPIs are green, but when I talk to our customers are unhappy, our people are unhappy, and our suppliers are unhappy, what's going on? And it's a classic case that when the green indicators disguise some red within, hence the watermelon. But this idea of outside-in thinking, which I think is a great way of thinking about that design for end-to-end experience, thinking from the really zooming out, and that is kind of exemplified in this end-to-end picture here. When we're very focused on silos, we're very focused on service delivery, it's easy to get fixed into failure demand traps on the right. If you've got an end-to-end process and experience perspective, you're much more likely to think about what's the business outcome that the key participant needs to get from this. And as a result, you're more likely to focus on speed and effectivity in getting to that end. So an end-to-end cycle, full cycle, process cycle, business stream is really important. The example there is a revenue cycle, but it's true for product cycles, people cycles, production, innovation, everything, supply chain. And of course, we talk about why end-to-end, and we also hear a lot about this idea of silo busting. And silo busting isn't meant to be a physical destruction of organizations. It's more, again, it's about mindset. When we've organized ourselves and focused everything on silo modes of operating and decision making, we end up with marginal efficiencies in the silo, maybe marginal efficiencies in the management of failure demand even, but it doesn't help the end-to-end process. It doesn't help performance measures across the cycle. The customer gets a poor experience, and the business outcome, we just don't get it. So that's a very, very important element. And there's a great little story from Rory Sutherland, who's is or was the vice chairman of Ogilvy, one of the world's largest marketing agencies. And he wrote this book called Alchemy. And he tells this lovely story called the Doorman fallacy. And it, just to summarize quickly, he says, when you go to a city in Zurich, London, New York, wherever, and you go to a fancy hotel, there's somebody outside the door, dressed very well, who's opening the door for guests. And it's easy to assume, without putting too much thought into it, that it would be much cheaper and more effective to replace that person who gets a salary with an automated door opening device. And it's only, and of course, some people have done this, and it's only when you have done it, or when you think about it more deeply, you realize the job of this person isn't just to open the door. They're there to welcome guests. They're there to provide guidance and directions, to discourage people who shouldn't be there, discourage burglary and all the rest of it. And even the fact they are there adds value and price to the hotel rooms, the apartment block, even the high-end retail store. So the irony is, by taking a short-term cost cut and replace that person with a door opening device, not only will your customers may find it a less decent experience, but more importantly, you might make less money, which is the essence of many businesses. So that's worth thinking about. So ultimately, this Gordian knot we talked about at the beginning is about eliminating failure demand. We've got to get a sharp knife through this. And coming back to your point here, Isabella, we've got to challenge the status quo. We've got to develop curiosity. We've got to focus on customer outcomes. And this recipe is quite powerful. Do you want to make any final comments about that?
Yeah, I think you don't reduce failure demand by working harder on the knot, you can say. You eliminate it by cutting what created the knot in the first place. And maybe this summarizes the whole discussion a little bit.
Yeah, I see. I get that. I think it's a very simple three-step process. But of course, the devil is in the detail. There's a lot below that. But think about how you can take those themes, both the mindset themes and the activity themes, into your own business and say, what can we do to cut failure demand? In fact, what can we do to identify it first, maybe? So that's great. Thank you, Isabella. So we've got some questions here. So I've got some more questions. Pop them into the interface, in the GoToWebinar interface. If we don't get to your question, then, or if you if we don't get to your question, we will email a response. If you have questions too late, you can email either of us. If you've got any requests, you want Isabella's advice on any of this, you can contact her through an email address there. And I'm at that email address also. So let's look at some of these questions that come through. So this is an interesting one. What is the hardest challenge in fixing failure demand? And while you think about that, Isabel, we kind of touched on it a little bit, but my sense is it's a lot of it is about human behavior. It is, although there's a mechanical element to this, there's a human behavioral element. And what are your thoughts to that? What's the hardest challenge in your experience?
In my experience, the hardest challenge is really that you destroy something to build something new, because you have to destroy part of the silo thinking and the little gardens. You have to go into little gardens and ensure that people work together on this one. And you need to enable somebody to have the authority and the accountability to work cross boundaries. And I think this is the biggest challenge, to accept this, to embrace this new mindset.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's a hearts and minds problem, because if you're destroying the old to create the new, you've got to win those hearts and minds for people to want to be on that journey. And we've got to also change the mindset from silo thinking to that end-to-end thinking. Yes. And then getting to the why, start with why. Getting to why is it's not something everyone's comfortable with. A lot of people are quite comfortable with whatever the situation is. Let's go with it. But again, the asking why these things happen, that's a quality of thought question. So I think that's and it's all human stuff. I mean, that's what's interesting, that this problem, you could easily say, well, the biggest problem is we haven't got the right ticketing system. It's nothing to do with that. It's a human behavioral and organizational challenge.
Yeah. And the natural reaction is, of course, protection, first of all, right? When you come with why and you ask these questions, the natural reaction is protection. So you need to first open up minds and to be able to talk about this and to be able to identify why this is happening. And then you can solve it together. But this is really the first step, and I think it's the hardest one.
It's a very interesting point, because actually this whole mindset issue, I know that I think she might be on the call, but Deborah Copps has produced this mindset analysis for GBS organizations, looking at the mindsets that exist, because they're kind of hidden. Mindsets are hidden, and this is kind of an interesting piece related to that. They're very interesting. Okay, let's have a look at another question here. So this is kind of interesting as well in the same dimension. So in transforming, re-engineering, or just eliminating failure demand, which stakeholders are most critical to engage?
That's an interesting one. Yes, which stakeholder? I mean, first of all, I think you need really you need to come from the top, because if you don't come from the top, people will feel threatened by this topic. So I think you really need to start from the top, opening up, and then also come from the bottom at the same time, because there is some push from the bottom to solve this, because there are people that have difficulties because of this and that see it every single day. So you should come from both sides, right? From the bottom and from the top, because the people that are most impacted are the ones in the middle. So I think when you come from both sides, you show the need, and at the same time, you ensure that you have the right resources in place, the right mindset established, and so on, then you will be successful.
That's a great point. I actually think there's multiple dimensions to this, because there is a technology element to all this as well. I think you need to have stakeholder engagement from the head of the unit that's responsible for service delivery, whether it's global business services, whether it's customer service, whatever. You also need engagement from the CIO, because there's a technology component to this, and people have lots of beliefs and myths about technology and what it can and can't do. So I think there's multiple dimensions there. And then whoever owns the service that's struggling with the failure demand needs to be involved. And whoever either owns or is functionally responsible for the key elements of that end-to-end process and experience you talked about. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. One final, I'm conscious that we're running out of time, but one other question. What could we do better to understand the real customer employee issues behind failure demand? So I think that's asking, so we've got this failure demand, but what are the specific things that are going wrong? Do we understand what the specific things that are going wrong are? Have you got any thoughts on that, Isabella?
Put the right metrics in place, because if you don't know what's going on in the organization, you're not even aware of it. So, I mean, the watermelon is a great fruit, but it's a terrible KPI, right? Don't do this. Put the right metrics in place to really see what's going on. And the moment this becomes visible, it's much easier to talk about it.
Well, I've got an idea here. It might be a bit dramatic, but at the risk of heresy, that we're very, NPS surveys, Net Promoter Score surveys are very popular right now. And I have a few issues with them that I think sometimes they reinforce the challenges that we're trying to deal with. But if you replaced NPS surveys at the end of every interaction with a request to the customer, employee, whoever was, was ever issuing the request, is assume it didn't work well. Just assume it didn't work well. And just ask them, what specifically could we have done better for you? Now, I think that's interesting because it changes the dynamic from how good are we, would you tell your friends about us, to we probably haven't done as well as you'd like. What specifically could we do? Now, the problem with that is when you've got 10,000 tickets a week, you don't really want to have 10,000 specifics. But I do think it does require a change of mindset of that kind of type.
Yeah.
But
yeah. Oh.
With that in mind, I said I'd be respectful of time. I'm 1 minute over, so I have to take myself out and give myself a good talking to. But thank you very, very much, Isabella, for sharing your time with us and your experience. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's a really, really important topic. We haven't solved it, but I think by naming it and coming up with some of the issues, which are definitely behavioral and mindset oriented, hopefully we're giving you some ideas. I wish you the best for the rest of your day or for tomorrow, depending what time of day it is. And I hope you found something useful here. Any questions you haven't answered, we will respond by email. And if you've got any others you want to ask, there's 2 email addresses there, fire away. Thank you very much, everyone. And thank you, Isabella.
Thank you also from my side. Thank you.